Hello and welcome to episode 87 of the So Bet Punks podcast about meaning, transcendence, awe and spirituality with a small s. My name is Siobhan.
And I'm Dave.
And here we are.
And are we doing a thing where we're leaving long pauses between?
Did I leave long
words?
pauses? I'm trying to not rush my words so much.
Yeah,
Americans don't rush their words and the Brits rush their words. And I would like to be more composed. But when I get excited, I start talking really fast. So I don't know if they were long pauses, but I'm going with it. That's me now.
Do Americans rush their words? Not rush their words?
I think they're more composed.
Depends on what coast you're from, maybe.
Well, I just don't think I've ever seen an American speak just as quickly as more often Brits do. I don't know. It's just something, maybe I've watched too many interviews and podcasts of late, but definitely the Americans speak more slowly and are more composed. I'm just sounding thick right now.
Yeah.
Apart from John Viveki, but he's Canadian.
Well, there you go. Well, any American listeners, please email and send us your voice, fast or slow, and we'll make a distinction, a scientifically based distinction. Oh, yeah.
Well, I guess it will be obvious is the American accent. Not just in the speed of their words.
We're never going to think about this again.
No, and no one's going to send us in any of them talking.
This episode is an auspicious occasion because we are starting our 8-episode series on the Eightfold Path. Mm-hmm. If that doesn't sound interesting to you, then listen anyway, because we probably won't be talking about it that much.
Yeah,
as always, we will just go off on various tangents.
It's a setting off point to... I don't know, to bring it into the real world. So we'll see how it goes. Who knows?
That's assuming that we live in the real world, or that the world even exists.
All right, Matrix.
So we always start this podcast by saying one thing that we have both done in the last 2 weeks, which have provided us with a sense of meaning, transcendence, awe, and spirituality with a small s. So Siobhan, please go first.
I do always go first. I feel a bit bad about this. But
no, we agreed at the start that you would always go first.
Did we?
Yeah. Because I know the reason was, well, it was because, this was your idea, I should say, if I remember rightly. This wasn't me being mean. It was because we assumed that we would often have the same thing.
Aww.
And we also assumed that I would be able to think on my feet a bit quicker than you.
I don't remember assuming that.
That was your...
Oh, maybe I did say that.
You were worried about me saying something that you were going to say and then having to come up with something on the spot.
Oh,
so I took the bullet.
You're kind.
Oh, yeah, I know. And but we've never had the same thing, I don't think.
Oh, I think there's been times. I thought this time would be one, but you assure me, even though you haven't heard what mine is yet, you've assured me that it's not the same.
Because I know what yours is.
Oh. Well, mine is the story of the small foxes that live in the garden 3 doors down from us. We have been so lucky to witness there's been a couple of foxes that come into our garden. I say our garden, we live in a top floor flat of a 4-story house, and so the garden belongs to the basement. So we can't go in the garden, we can't play with these foxes. But from our window, we can see these 2 foxes that have come quite often, every year. Since we've been here, I think they've always been in the garden.
Yeah.
And then they haven't been around for a while, and I thought, oh no, I can't see these foxes. And they are very joyous, and they play. And then I looked across.
Turns out they were foreplaying.
Well, maybe. Woo! Because I looked across to the garden about 3 doors down, and there was not 1, not 2, but 7 fox cubs all frolicking and just having the best time. And this has basically been my last 2 weeks, because every day they're out there, morning and night, playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. And they just bring so much bloody joy to our lives, because I know you also have spent many an hour staring out the window as well.
This is why I knew what yours was going to be, because it's been basically our entire lives for the past 2 weeks.
It's just been insane. It's just been a roller coaster, a proper David Attenborough documentary going on outside our window. And so this is the other thing.
It has felt a little bit like we were sort of observing them as, I don't know, as Attenborough might.
Definitely going out the window.
Yeah, that's pretty much what his programs sound like, I assume.
Yeah. How he can be so composed. He speaks nice and slowly as well. But obviously nature is not cruel. This is the thing. Nature is nature. We don't have to have 7 babies in the hope that one survives. And I think that was something you mentioned when we saw that there were 7 babies. You were like, oh, well, that number is going to go down because, that's how nature works. And that's why that little fox has had so many babies. And there was a little death a couple of days ago that you said. In fact, I've never come home to I came home and you were just like, you just had that face of, I've got some really bad news to tell you. And I was like, oh my God, who in my family is dead? And it turns out the person in my family that was dead was the 7th fox cub laying in the garden.
Well, or possibly the 6th. It was a strange day because I was off work that day. And so I looked out and it looked like there was a little one asleep on the grass. And I thought, oh, he's just having a sleep in the sun. I thought he was basking because the sun was out. And then as the day went on, because I was checking on him, like David Attenborough might, so regularly,
peeping
at the baby foxes, he just didn't move and didn't move and didn't move and didn't move. And then, but the funny thing was the day before there was one less fox, I think.
Right.
So, and it's an odd thing, isn't it? How, because I have to say, it really affected me, that little one dying.
Yeah.
And you too. And, but it's weird, isn't it? Because so there were 7 cubs.
Yeah.
And then the next day there were 6.
Yeah.
And so of course you can use cognitive dissonance quite nicely. You can just assume that one of them's just asleep in the bush or something.
Yeah, you're not faced with the reality of what actually has happened because you haven't seen it, so it's not real yet.
And then it's only because this little one, and God knows what happened to him. I don't know whether he just wasn't built for this world or whether, because they were playing quite hard, I don't know whether one of his little brothers hurt him. I just have no idea what happened to him. But the thing is, because he was there and you could see it, all of a sudden it became this huge, quite a distressing thing. Whereas, we had that discussion before, which was kind of like, well, probably by the end of this, there might be 2 cubs in reality, and that's just how nature is. And it's like, if you don't see it, it's like it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But as soon as you're actually faced with it, it makes perfect sense. But it's also kind of absurd, isn't it? Because just seeing one less, you just think, oh, it'll be fine, it's fine, there's nothing.
Well, it is, and I mean, there's definitely something about consciousness there, isn't there? Because you can only,
basically what we're going to be talking about.
You can
later,
only know what you can perceive and what you can actually see.
Yeah.
And so, you're totally right. Like, you can intellectually know that 2 less cubs means, they could be sleeping, but they could be, sleeping forever somewhere. But actually being faced with it. And it was particularly sad because twofold. The foxes didn't come back. So sad in 2 ways. I didn't get to see any more foxes. But also this little one. And this is the human silliness in us, maybe. Not silliness, but our human nature. That we, mourn our death. And
you kept saying, why haven't they buried him?
Yeah, I was just
like the foxes were going to come and dig a little hole.
It's just like, he's just left there. And it's really sad. And I'm just like, actually, no, that's what humans feel. And that's what humans think. And actually crows as well. Crows have funerals.
Yeah, but, that's true.
Foxes, you quite rightly said, they don't want to really hang around where their little brother died. They will have just moved on. But then that's magical as well, isn't it? I mean, that's incredible, really, if you think about it. Foxes don't have consciousness, really, or have a version of consciousness which isn't the same as ours. And obviously, in that context, it's what we were talking about a while ago about dogs kicking their little legs out when they poo. Like, why... How would they even understand that cub was dead? And they obviously do. There's obviously like an innate sense in them and in us and in everybody that we just know. You just know. Because to be honest, when it first happened, I was like, because it was during the day, and obviously they sleep during the day, and I was like, God, when they come out, are they all just going to be playing? Are they just going to go back to playing like they were playing before, but then just with this dead one slap bang in the middle of where they were playing? I was like, that's going to be so sad. And then I had I was an idiot because I kept going and checking, and by about 4:00 in the afternoon, I knew basically that it was obviously dead. But I was still checking every now and again. And then there was one point in the early evening where I looked out and the mum was just there, just sort of walking around it. And of course, then I create a narrative which is basically, based on a fairy tale. Then I'm thinking the mum is there mourning the little person, and probably that's not at all. Yeah, well, I don't know, but what I'm saying is that, who knows? Why do we know? Why does an animal without conscious thought know
to move the other babies away from the dead baby. I mean, it just does.
I mean, there must be so much in the way of instinct, or, you know, if one's died.
But where does instinct come from?
It's so hard to know.
You know, we just don't know. We know so much. I mean, ultimately, that it's, you know, it's one of the obvious big questions. But we know so much. But where do things like that come from? There's no scientific explanation for them.
No.
Well, there might be a scientific explanation for how they happen, or there might have been. You know, you might be able to scan someone's brain and see that certain bits of the brain are.
Yeah, and I want to say things like evolutionary, such and such is.
But it explains how. It doesn't explain why.
Oh,
you know.
Well,
it explains how. You know, you understand. You totally understand.
Well,
It would be unhealthy for the foxes to hang around a dead cub, and so of course the mum will move the cubs away from the dead cub because it's.
Well, and also the why could be, has this baby died because of the area? I need to move my family away from this area in order to survive.
But where do those thoughts come from?
And is it
why
in a
do
fox,
those
is
thoughts
it a thought
exist?
or is it just
how does the fox know that any of those things are the case?
Well, does a fox know, or does it just do? I don't know.
No one knows.
No one knows. I'm reading a book at the minute that's about whether animals have conscious thought, and one of the things is the ability to reflect, and one of the arguments is if an animal can recognize itself as itself and not other, then that's a huge thing. And I wondered that when the foxes are playing, because so basically if I could the way they proved it is if an animal looks in the mirror and you put a mark on its head, does it try and move the mark? Or does it just look at that thinking it's another creature? Or does it know it's itself and want to remove the mark knowing that it's unusual? And I think there's about it must be more to it in animals when it's siblings, because you must have pheromones and like those sorts of things as to why you recognise that this is my sibling and I'm going to run around and play with you and you're not other to me. But
do you know when human babies pass that test? When a human baby recognises itself in the mirror, because I feel like I don't think that's immediate.
No, you're totally right. When it decides that it's something, it has a self and it's other from others. I don't know.
How do you think it felt?
Way.
The first time you ever looked in the mirror and realised that was you. I wonder how that feels. You never know.
Yeah, you'd never know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Craziness. I have loved the nature show that has been down the road from us.
Sorry about the death bit.
Yeah, no, it's been a roller coaster. But there was a fox playing this morning, so that's the other thing. Little baby fox that died was there for about 2 days, and then this morning is now not there. We don't really want to consider why that fox is not there. I'm going to just assume someone's buried it or moved it, to mourn it. But nature is a cruel beast, and it's probably the other fox's dinner by now. But anyway, another foxy, one of the babies, is out there frolicking today.
Well, that fox was in the exact same position as the corpse was. So I think I'm telling myself that it's actually that fox was just asleep for all of those days, and now he's just alive again.
Yeah.
Like Jesus coming out of his cave.
The Jesus fox has risen.
So
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
And we were there to see it.
It was 2 days. 2 or 3 days. Yeah, maybe let's just round it to 3 and call it Jesus. Yeah, that's what's brought me a lot of meaning and a lot of awe in the terrible joke. David, what have you done that's brought you a sense of meaning, transcendence, or spirituality? With a big or a small s, whatever you fancy.
Well, in truth, I've also just been looking at foxes.
I thought you were going to steal mine.
So, but as we stated at the start, I'm better at thinking on my feet than you. No, I knew you were going to talk about it. So, but I have had. So I read an amazing book called "Don't Forget We're Here Forever" by Lamorna Ash, and it is a book which is about idea that maybe Gen Z are all finding religion. It's an idea that I've heard before. I think there is some figures and what have you. It's hard. I think it's a very hard one to judge. But a lot of people of Gen Z age are going back to church, and very specifically, some it's interesting. Russian Orthodox churches, I think, are the ones who are getting the most most people.
Is that because, and I don't know anything about orthodoxy, but isn't that because it's like spiritual and kind of, I want to say esoteric, but esoteric is not the right word, but it's more less dogmatic, maybe.
I think it's very dogmatic.
Oh, really?
I think it's, well, I'm not really sure. I don't really know, I suppose, if I'm honest. But my impression, well, what I know about it is that it's quite hard. It's quite harsh.
Oh, really?
Like you have to stand up for 3 hours or something.
Oh, wow.
To do a liturgy. And it's a yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know why that is, but it seems to be the case. But the book is really interesting. I don't think that Lamorna Ash is actually Gen Z, because I think she's 30 or 31 or something in this book. So God. I'm pretty sure if I do my maths right, that means she's an old millennial. But she talks about herself as Gen Z, so that's fine. I suppose that well, is
just
what
like
it is,
you talk
it?
about yourself as a millennial.
Well, I'm on the cut. Let's not talk about generations.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic book. It's really empathetic. I don't like. There's aspects of it that I'm less fond of, but it's just a really interesting journey. It's quite personal. She basically goes into it because two of her friends, who were like a comedy double act at a university, both decided, I think separately to each other, but both decided at around the same time that they were going to become priests. And she was really like, how did these people go from being like presumably sort of partying students who were doing comedy to suddenly getting to this point, like a relatively short period later? So she kind of goes and meets up with them, and then she spends, I think, like a year, maybe even 2 years, kind of just going on this journey of signing herself up for loads of different kind of, it's all Christianity, it should be said, signing herself up for loads of retreats. She starts going to a Quaker meeting. She starts going to various different churches. She starts meeting people that have had various different experiences. She goes on what is kind of the equivalent of the Alpha Course. I don't know what it's called, but it's the equivalent of the Alpha Course, but for very conservative Christians. So,
okay.
And her attitude to life is very much the opposite of that. So she's kind of, I suppose, not to be, this is far too simplistic of a thing to say, but she's kind of got the politics and the kind of lifestyle of what you would assume a Gen Z type of person would have, if that makes sense. Just because I can't be bothered to go into it all. So she's quite uncomfortable with the Christian church in general, in the same way that I'm sure most people are. And she just goes on this journey, but she's very open-minded and finds that she gets something out of spirituality and does not exactly become a Christian as such. And I feel almost like I don't think she's going to, because the book is very much a sort of standalone thing, and it sounds as if she's written one book before, and it sounds as if she's going to write about something completely different next. But it almost feels like there could be a sequel, because it kind of finishes at the point where she's kind of going to church and getting something out of it, and she's seeing a lot of positive aspects of religion generally, but certainly she's not become a card-carrying Christian as such. But it's just a really interesting journey and a really fantastic book. And very open-minded about. She states her preferences as far when she, so when she goes on the extremely Christian version of the Alpha Course, she does not like the what's being preached to her and stuff.
Right.
And she's very willing to sort of point that out, but finds herself in all sorts of interesting places. She goes on a retreat on some tiny island off the coast of Scotland, or I think it's an island off an island on the coast of Scotland, which I think is quite famous. I think it's more or less on the island is just this kind of, I don't really know what it is. It's not a monastery.
I know what it is. I can't think what it is, but yes, it is famous.
But she just and lots of other things, loads of other things which I can't really go through. But it was just interesting reading. I suppose a number of different reasons why I found it interesting. It was very interesting because she came from a very similar place, I think, to where we've been coming from, which is as someone who's sort of interested in religion and can see the positives of it, but maybe isn't necessarily religious themselves, but is willing to have an open mind towards it. But also, it's quite challenging, I suppose, for me. I definitely don't have a negative attitude towards Gen Z people as such. It's not that, but obviously it's, I'm old. I'm old. I come from a very different place, and whilst I like to think I'm quite open-minded, and I think we both are quite open-minded towards, obviously, other people's point of views. But it was interesting. I don't know. It's not often that I read a book written by someone who is in their 20s now.
Right.
Really. Or, or that's written currently. I read loads of books by people that were in their 20s, but they were probably written in 1860 or something. So it was kind of an interesting insight into something which I suppose by default it made me realise how much. So we've talked a lot about what you put into your brain is what comes out, and it made me realise a lot that so much of what I put into my brain, whilst it is all positive and all has a very open-minded stance, is largely people of my age or probably older, or around my age.
Yeah.
And partly that's kind of perfectly natural. I mean, I don't, that's not entirely true about music. Like, definitely there's bands that I really like that have people who are younger than me in them. But even then, when I sort of think to myself, oh, well, I do like that band full of youngsters, they're probably 30 or something, It's interesting to sort of immerse yourself in the life of people who are coming from a completely different place to you.
Definitely. And
experience it in a really positive way.
No, I completely agree. I think you're right that we think we're pretty open-minded, and I think we are. But I have noticed that a bit about the podcasts and interviews we've been watching and listening to that are very varied in the political leanings, and I think and religious leanings and spirituality leanings, and so I think we see that as very open-minded. But yeah, I'm not immune to the fact that it is all our age and older, and there's not a lot of younger people that I'm listening to, and I worry. I'm always aware of this now that I still think of myself as young, but there's so many people younger than you, and you just don't want to. I just don't want to be one of them like, oh, these young uns, they don't know, because everyone has always experienced the older generation thinking that they're not as good or stuff was better in their day, and I hear myself and everyone my age and older making these comments, and especially flippantly about like music or political ideas, but quite a lot in the kind of intellectual kind of conversations, and political conversations, not so much the spiritual ones that we've watched and listened to. But I do notice it kind of like a naivety that people place upon the slightly younger than us generation, and I just think I feel like I might fall into that trap a little bit and not listening to many of the voices that are younger than me.
I don't think it's as black and white as that, though.
No, I don't. I'm not trying to say it's black and white. Sorry.
Well, no, but I think that there's definitely truth to that, but then there is also a truth to the fact that everybody, no matter what age they are, has gone through a certain level of retardation over the past 15 years.
Brilliant.
Through social media and through all the things that we talk about a lot. Yeah. And so to suggest that hasn't affected the young as well as the old, and it's easy to view that through terms of, young people are rubbish now. And of course that's not true, but I think the problem is that culture, I don't think this is me, and we've had this conversation a lot, I don't think this is me being an old person by saying that culture has kind of really dropped off a cliff.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
and I think that's pretty obvious, but also to some extent like provable is pushing it maybe, but I think you can hold up most generations worth of art, for example, and say this is clearly unquestionably better than what's being created at the moment. Now that's not just about young people, that's about all of us.
Yeah.
And so I think, but by default you kind of look to your young people to make the best music and the best, famously, probably if you go back and look at every classic band from every era from the 50s onwards, it's people in their early 20s for the most part, sometimes late teens. And of course, by default, people in their late teens and early 20s right now have been affected by all of the same things as everybody else is being infected by. I was going to say affected. I did say affected, but then I think infected is probably the right word, so I stuck with it. And that's not just this generation. That's not just immediate people right this second. I think that's been true for 10 years or so. And so, yeah, it's more complex than that, as everything, of course, is.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not to see. It's not young people's fault. But by being brought up in a digital world,
yeah, then it's,
I suppose the type of culture being created changes as well. So it might be that computer games have got way better between the 90s and now, for example. But as a result, because that's what people are interested in. But not as a result, but alternatively, music hasn't got better. Maybe.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. One other wonderful thing that I love about the fact that you read that book is the amount of like serendipity that happened that week. This is just a side note, but I just really like the connectedness of various points here. I have a good friend at work who told me that his wife had just bought this book, and the first thing he did was send me a picture of it and said, "Dave has to read this, it'll be really good." I got home from work.
I've never met this person.
No, you've not. Yeah, you've not met this person. I came home and I was like, about to tell you need to get this book. Apparently it's really good and it sounds amazing, and you were on the sofa reading it. I was like, you fucking joking? And it's just a wonderful little... There are a lot of people in the world, and that must be true because, your friendship group is a microcosm of the world, but there must be a lot of people in the world feeling the same sort of ways that we do for this book to be out and to probably be doing well. But I just like that in my little bubble that it's happening. I just like that people are looking for answers and looking for this sort of interesting stuff.
I think also it's probably normalising in a lot of ways, which is nice. When we first started having these sorts of conversations, and I think probably I was the one that brought most of this up with you in the first instance, it felt like it's a very weird thing to bring up, isn't it? Talking about religion in 2025. And I suppose hearing somebody else, it would be nice. It would be nice to say, "Oh, I'm a maverick. I don't care what other people think." But in reality, it's kind of nice when other people are going through something similar to you.
Definitely,
it's kind of the opposite of that. Misery loves company. It's like joy loves company.
Aww, joy loves company.
And it does make you just feel a little bit less insane, maybe weird. And I'm sure that most people listening to the podcast think, "Well, you are insane and you are weird, and you shouldn't be thinking about all of these religious things."
No, but I think there is definitely a truth in that. I think that there's the amount of people I've spoken to, off the cuff, that have shared opinions similar to ours, and not just share it, but really enjoy having that conversation. All of a sudden, that conversation is opened, and people, we have that conversation for a really long time. My good friend Mel just came down, and exactly that. She's always kind of had this weird religious background somewhere. Her mum's part of the church, but I don't think she's ever really been Christian. Mel used to sing in the cathedral, and has always been religion adjacent. But we've never talked about religion, to be honest. And we just started having this conversation, and it was ages, just so long and so in depth, and so all of the themes that we talk about. And I don't know, it's just the amount of people that I have these kind of you just drop it, you just throw it out there, here's something religious leaning, maybe there's something more, maybe we need more, maybe I want more. And the other person immediately latches onto that, almost to be oh my God, you think the same? I've had this little tinkering thought in the back of my mind. And it's not that everyone's secretly religious. I just think that there's something about, again, we bring up John Vervaeke's thoughts on the meaning crisis all the time, but there's this feeling that people want something more. And we used to call it meaning in life, or meaning of life, but it's something within that. People are entertaining the idea that actually, beyond it, something more spiritual.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably something about reality as well, isn't it? It's you open a door to allow other people to talk about this sort of thing by talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's not because you've got some sort of ultimate power. It's just true of everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
If something normalizes, then all of a sudden, if someone wants to talk about it, then they can talk about it. Yeah. I suppose.
I agree.
You would, but before you start talking about it, you would assume that this sort of thing has completely gone away and no one's thinking about it.
Yes, or you're becoming mentally unwell for even thinking about it. I remember when you were having this kind of beginning of some sort of meaning crisis, and I remember you being very sheepish when you told me that you were debating going to church. And I remember thinking, oh wow, that's pretty pretty brave to even go or talk about it, and it still is. But it's like how we've moved. That was about a year and a half ago now, and it's that I don't know. Just a lot of conversation and a lot of like religious talk has happened since then. I don't know where I'm going with that, but I mean it in a complimentary way.
Well, these poor listeners have had to listen to all of that.
Oh, shush.
So. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
So we will now. I was going to make a jingle.
Really?
But I didn't.
The Eightfold Path.
There we go. So
please don't clip that and use it ever again.
So we're going to be talking about the Eightfold Path. We've come to this from probably the last couple of episodes, really, where we were talking about bullshit. And the Eightfold Path being a very good path, I suppose, out away from and out of all the bullshit that surrounds us. If that doesn't make sense to you, then maybe go back and listen to the last couple of episodes.
Of course.
It may still not make sense to you, but we've done our best.
So, in simple terms, the Eightfold Path, as described by Christmas Humphreys, a white man who learned about Buddhism and then brought it back to the West, as almost all of our culture about Buddhism is in this country. It is...
A bit of politics there. I mean, I think everyone we're talking about, apart from one, is probably a white man.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Oh, I've got two lovely ones that aren't. But anyway, it is essentially the Buddhist manual to self-enlightenment. And the Eightfold Path, it's the original teachings of the Buddha. That's the essential thing. So we call it Buddhist. It is the main thing in Buddhism. But at the time in which it was being created, there was no such thing as Buddhism. It's just this one guy who worked out how to stop self-deception, liberate oneself from self-deception, which is essentially another word for bullshit, and feel enlightened. Enlightened being like absolute final goal, but we can have moments of it every day.
But as I think we said last time, there really isn't a goal.
Yeah.
No, you don't want this to end.
Yeah. Oh, and it's lifetimes and lifetimes if you believe in that sort of stuff.
Just keep going through it.
Just keep going. But it's nice because it's a very progressive, trust the process, and you'll get, I don't know, there's lots of different parts of it that gives you joy every day. The story that is told by many different people that talk about Buddhism and its origins is that the Buddha created this kind of way of meditating, and then I can't remember what age he would have been, like 35. I think he died when he was 80. So at the age of 35, he had done this style of meditation and this style of practice, this Eightfold Path, and became enlightened, and then spent 45 years teaching it endlessly through his meditation. Didn't really need to sleep and would just basically teach it all day, every day, to various people. And the story is that in his last hours, when everyone knew he was going to pass away, he said, I'm going to pass away tonight. Someone went up to him, begged to see him, and the last thing that he shared with him is famously this Eightfold Path. So that's why it's very revered by Buddhists, and it's essentially the main teaching that the Theravada branch, this is the main thing. And when we went to our spiritual, the silent retreat that we went on earlier in the year, that's under S.N. Goenka, and he stood clear of calling it Buddhism, but did focus on this being the essential teaching. This was the thing that the Buddha taught, with a very specific style of meditation that followed through with it.
And we are going to spend the next 8 episodes dedicating each one to each of these elements. Mm-hmm. Just very quickly to start off with, I think we've probably made this clear already, and if you've been listening to this podcast, then it's very clear. We're not talking about this in any sort of theoretical sense. We're not experts in this. We're certainly not teachers of the Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
Our idea is that we're going to talk around the ideas, hopefully use some other authors who are much cleverer than we are to describe to you what each of these elements are, but then our discussion is going to be very much about how we bring it into our life. Mm-hmm. And I think hopefully to some extent, I imagine the next 8 weeks being a way for us to bring together all of the different things that we've been talking about for God only knows how long since we've been doing this podcast, and sort of put them into some sort of sensible order where it's not just us meandering along coming up with random ideas. But we will see whether that works out or not.
See.
So the first of the Eightfold Path is right view, sometimes known as right understanding.
Indeed.
One of the things you may learn, although I don't think we're going to concentrate on this at all, is that translations differ the way that people view these things somewhat differ quite a lot. So we're just going to take a few of our favourite authors, give you how they describe it, and then we're just going to riff.
Just going to riff. Just going to riff on Buddhism.
And I think we'll probably end up using the same authors, because I have some favourites and Siobhan has some favourites. So do you want to kick off?
So I really, 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 really like Thich Nhat Hanh as an author. He is oh my God, I'm going to get it wrong. Is he from Vietnam? I think he's a Vietnamese monk. And he is probably the most famous published in the West at the moment. If you were to look at the shelves of Waterstones, for example, definitely got the most books there, definitely the most easy to understand, I would say, probably quite accessible, while still being relatively authentic. And so he describes right view as a few different ways, but there's two ways that I really like. One is a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths. We're not going to go into it too much, because there's a lot of the thing with Buddhism that I find it really difficult to access is there are a lot of different here's these 4 of these things, 5 of these things, but the Four Noble Truths are pretty self-explanatory. That there is suffering, that we make this suffering ourselves, how to get out of that, we can get out of suffering, and the 4th noble truth is use the Eightfold Path. Essentially, it all kind of Buddhism's quite clever. It always oh look, there's this horrible thing. Oh look, this next thing will help you get out of this horrible thing. Quite like it. But one of the things that he described is it's the ability to distinguish between wholesome roots and unwholesome roots, and this is this idea that we have inherent parts of us that could be encouraged that are good, and inherent parts of us that could be encouraged that are bad. If you just think of them as seeds, it kind of works a bit better. And he describes something as we all have the seed of loyalty in us, and if we water that, we'll become a loyal person. But that's not to say that the seed of betrayal is not in us, and if we water that, we can be someone that betrays people. And I really like this as an idea that we are not all, it plays with this concept of good and bad, inherently good and inherently bad people. I think it's useful to remember that we could all potentially be horrible and potentially be good, and it's about taking it right back to the little thing within us that is that. The next part is thinking. This is pre-thinking. This is your perceptions. This is your inherent views within us. But there's a little bit more, but I'll get onto it later. But yeah, he's my main go-to guy.
So I'm going to grab some knowledge from Brad Warner, who is a Zen monk, a white man, from his book Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. Much simpler. Right view. To me, this means knowing that you don't know. He uses Event Horizon, the film, as an example, but I'm not going to share his example. So Buddhist texts about right view are very critical of people who get too wrapped up in trying to answer unanswerable questions. The questions Buddhists regard as unanswerable are precisely the kinds of questions most other religions try to provide answers to, like the nature of the soul, the afterlife, God, and the origin of the universe, and so on. And he basically says that we will never really understand the world, so there's no point in trying to understand the world. We have to operate within it. And obviously, knowing what you don't know speaks very much of Greek philosophy. One of the things you're going to find probably a lot, I mean across the board, I suppose, and we talk about this quite a lot, is that so many of the teachings that come out from completely different places at relatively completely different times, although some of them are quite similar timings wise, are really similar. And there's an awful lot of this particularly which is just pure Stoic philosophy. Yeah,
no, I like that. Thich Nhat Hanh also has something that he similarly says to that. It's just there's right views, wrong views, and this is called right view. But he also says that all views are wrong view, because the idea of even having a view means that you think something different to someone else, and he kind of just says, what's the point of that? Being present is more important. My other one is from Goenka, who is the chap behind our silent retreat. He terms it as right understanding, and there's a bit in this that I really like, but it's about right understanding is real wisdom. Thinking about truth is not enough. We must realize truth ourselves. We must see things as they really are and not just as they appear to be. Apparent truth is reality, but one that we must penetrate in order to experience the ultimate reality of ourselves and eliminate suffering. He then goes on, because I think he sees this as like the main focus within his style of meditation. So there's a differentiation between different types of wisdom, but he's very, very focused on experiential wisdom. So the idea of, which is where his meditation comes from, the idea of like actually realizing something for yourself and not just what you're told. But I like that. That's a point.
And one last one from Mark Epstein, who is another white man. I've just realised that I'm the one who's coming in with all the white men. And you're coming in with the the bona fides. But Mark Epstein is Epstein, I think, is both a Buddhist and also a psychoanalyst. So his books are quite interesting, probably more for us as psychiatric nurses and ex-psychiatric nurses. But he says right view is basically a way of the Buddha encouraging people to be realistic about themselves and the nature of things, and asks us to focus on incontrovertible truth of impermanence rather than trying to shore up a flawed and insecure self.
I like that.
So my understanding of this is that right view is the thoughts beneath the thoughts.
Yeah.
So, i.e., our subconscious, I suppose. It's the basis to which our thoughts are kind of coming from. So if you follow the Eightfold Path through, and there's no spoilers really, but the next one is right intention or right thinking. So that is a much more active, conscious thing. How you think is training your brain to think in a certain way, maybe, but we'll get to that on the next episode. But this is kind of, to me, what the basis of that is.
Yeah. Like you say, the subconscious part of it, maybe.
Yeah, and so through the meditation style that we do, the Goenka's meditation style, that's why the physical nature of that is so important. So the idea is that you're training your subconscious to more or less not feel pain, I suppose, fundamentally. It's a very simplistic way of putting it. It's much more complex than that.
Or but to see things as it really is. So experience it as a feeling, but not attach the feeling of pain or trying to avoid aversion or craving when things are good.
Yeah.
Trying to not get to that point, just try and see things as it really is.
But as a result of that, your thinking then is informed by that.
Yeah.
So an example for me would very much be, since I've been doing this meditation style, I've felt much less low-level stress about just things, dealing with people, dealing with situations, much less stress, and so therefore my thought processes are different because I'm more positive as a result of the fact that I don't feel as much stress.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
And so to me, it's at that level. It's not just about not feeling stressed, by the way. It's definitely not what it is. But it's at that level. It's at the level below our consciousness.
Yeah. That's why I quite like the idea of, trusting that these things are working, because it's training and interfering with that level that you don't even really realize what it's doing. This is what keeps me going every time I feel like meditation is really difficult or that I'm not even doing it right, is that you won't consciously know if you're doing it right or not. It's so accepting that there is a level beyond what you can even get to, that you are just routinely training that will influence everything else. Goenka definitely listed it as kind of an orderly path, but Thich Nhat Hanh has kind of said, and I think it's accepted by everyone within Buddhism that I've read, is that it's an intermingled path. It's one affects everyone else. The 8 bits are in a circle and there's lines joining all of them, saying all of them interact with all of the other ones.
Yeah, definitely.
Improve one and you'll improve all the other bits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I do sort of feel this one's at the start for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that in lots of ways the other ones are, as with everything else, there's a million different ways of looking at it. So there's no actual clear answer, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So on the one hand, all of these things interact with each other, and on the other hand, they can go in the exact order that we're going to do them, and one builds upon the next one, builds upon the next one, builds upon the next one.
And just to throw a spanner in those works, Goenka has it at the end because he thinks everything builds to it.
It's because Buddhists are wankers.
Buddhists are just, they do their own thing. That's why it's just, there's a reason that there's so many books. Just everyone's got a different way. But that's fine. That's fine. It's totally fine.
But I think in some ways what you were talking about there is about it's about trusting in the process.
Yeah.
And in a way that is kind of right view, isn't it? It's about saying, okay, this thing I'm doing doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Like why does me sitting with my eyes shut for 40 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than that, but let's simplify it. Lead to me being less stressed. That doesn't make any sense, but of course it does make sense because we know that meditation works, and it is now, that back then it wasn't proved by science or whatever, but now I think it's been proved pretty much without question that more or less any form of meditation, but the Vipassana version that we learn very much so, has kind of been proved to do these things, right? But it's about trusting in the process. It's about, and in a way you could say this about all religious thought, all teaching, all philosophical thought. Ultimately, not killing someone else, right, doesn't actually make logical thought if, for example, you can take their house if you kill them, or if you get their money, or you get their whatever. And if you look back in history, of course, killing another person in order to, particularly in the context of like monarchs and things, killing someone else in order to take what they've got was literally just what people did.
Yeah, it was the thing.
And so, of course, you can say from a societal perspective, a religious teaching which says do not kill is good for society because it means people aren't going around killing each other. But it's also very good for you because if you go and kill somebody, I'm sure we can all imagine how much shit that puts into your soul and into your consciousness, and how you'll never be able to not see, unless you're a psychopath, you'll never be able to not see the thing that you've done, and you'll always be faced with the fact that you've left someone without a father or a mother or a whatever. But actually the teaching itself, obviously it makes perfect sense to us, do not kill, or however it's worded in any religion, and there's always something that says that. Makes perfect sense to us in a practical way, but actually if you sort of rip away all of its context, or rip away the context of where we live now, it's quite an obscure idea. Certainly not an idea that most people ever had. For millions of years humans have been killing each other quite happily. And it's something specific to humankind because, again, watching these foxes too much, no other creature really that we can understand would have this rule. Like, it's definitely something about conscious thought that does this. Like, it feels a bit like humans have been encumbered with conscious thought. No one knows why, but religion has sought to kind of organize us a bit because conscious thought is huge. Why have we got this? Other animals, it's exactly that. It's you've got to kill or be killed sort of situations, but we don't. We look after ourselves. We live a long time. We cohabit and have societies. We change our environment, and we're weird and we're different. And so I think religion worked out along the way. I don't know. We might still need a little bit of a guidebook to remind people, especially in the beginning, because like you say, humankind now we kind of take for granted we shouldn't kill each other. Doesn't mean that there isn't war. Doesn't mean that there isn't people that are really horrible to each other. But religions must have worked out years and years ago. Let's just make sure we get that in the main bits. 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. We've got 5 precepts in Buddhism, and one is about not killing. It seems obvious to us now, but then, like you say, there might well have been a time where that wasn't the done thing, or it's not the logical thing, especially when we're evolving from apes and other animals. And of course there's a complication to that, because you could also argue that it's normal to us not to kill because our culture is built on religion, we have laws which came first. You could argue, but it's one of the reasons why I get a bit frustrated when people say things like, in the name of sort of religion being evil, religion with a big R, like or Christianity probably gets it more, though certainly Buddhism doesn't get it. that it's a sexist, racist institution or something. Now, of course, the institution itself is and can be and has been. No, there's no question about that. But the thing is that the very idea of, let's say, for example, sexism, the very idea that every human should have the same amount of rights is a Christian idea. Like, we wouldn't have sexism. Well, we would have sexism, but we wouldn't have an argument against sexism, for example, without a Christian basis. We wouldn't have had the idea that anybody was equal in the first instance, because again, if you go back to living in caves, there was no concept of anybody being equal necessarily. But the very morals that we base most of our political thought on actually come from Christian ideas, and they wouldn't exist. The context with which we see them through wouldn't exist without a religious context. I believe. You look like you disagree.
No, I'm just trying to understand it. It's not that I don't disagree. I disagree. So a lot of people in the UK right now that wouldn't identify as religious, however, they're probably following rules and laws and moral codes that didn't exist pre-religion.
Yeah, maybe a bit more specific than that. I mean, I think that is unquestioned.
Yeah, no, I'm just.
I think. I mean, no question. Our society was built on like in Britain, our society was built on Christian ideals. I don't think there's any question about that, really. Okay. Like our laws were, but more. I'm more talking in a sort of slightly more obscure context than that. In as much as the very ideas. So, like caring for somebody else in any context. So, I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to bring up sexism as if that was the one. Like, it was just the first one that jumped into my head. Like, caring about another person or seeing another person as equal to you comes from a Christian ideal. Now, you need to see somebody as an equal to you in order to give a fuck about the colour of their skin, their gender, their sexuality, or for that matter, their right to be doing anything. Because if you don't have that Christian ideal in the first instance, then you don't have the concept of being equal with anybody. And in some ways, I suppose that metaphorically is quite similar to right view. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a underlying thing that our society is built on, and that therefore all things are added to on top of that. And equally, that is kind of right view in this context, is that all of our thoughts are built upon these roots. Like
inherent wisdom. There is wisdom at the beginning of all of this. Like, they're not just rules and laws because someone thought it was good for us. It's like, actually, these are inherently wise.
Well, that's
things
a theological question, maybe. I mean, as to where, if you were to believe in a God, then you could say that God gave us these rules in order to make our life work better. Most people don't believe in a God, so therefore if you look at Christianity through more of a cultural perspective, or equally Buddhism through more of a... I mean, Buddhism is a bit different, isn't it? Because this is a man who we know is a man who is sometimes treated a bit more like a deity, but fundamentally is a guy with a good idea and some wisdom. And in some ways, you could definitely say the same about Jesus. Was a guy with a good idea and some wisdom. But the difference is that all gets caught up in woo-woo, more woo-woo. I mean, I think fundamentally, a little bit like we talked about when we'd been on our silent retreat, the Buddha was probably caught up in quite a lot of woo-woo, but it just wasn't, Buddhism was not it.
Yeah.
He would have presumably had something which resembles a sort of Hindu perspective. Yeah. I assume.
But like you've already alluded to, there's also the Greek thinkers that definitely, I mean, some of them were Christian, but were they Christian? I guess they were.
Christianity didn't exist.
No, they wouldn't have been Christian, no. But they were, well, there we go. So they were thinking the same sort of things and coming up with the same sort of morals. I mean, the ancient Greeks were not.
Well, they had gods.
They were difficult people, and
Well, maybe, but there was a spiritual. I mean, I don't know really about it, so we can't talk about it. But there was unquestionably sort of woo-woo in ancient Greece.
But I guess it was people trying to really extrapolate from woo-woo, like Socrates. He's the guy that was said, I know that I don't know, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And would go around
Scholar,
asking.
Siobhan, scholar.
Yeah, there we go. Who'd go around asking people questions to really get to the bottom of something to kind of leave them with a.
Yeah, but
bit
that was logic. So
Yeah.
so that was much more of a, you could, I mean, in a way you could look at it almost like a science of thought. That in of itself had nothing to do with the woo-woo. What I'm trying to say is that in ancient Greece, there's lots of Greek myths. There's lots of Greek gods.
Yeah.
There was woo-woo of sorts. And in the same way that the Buddha would have probably been wrapped up in some sort of woo-woo.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you could argue that 2,500 years ago, that woo-woo was more obvious to us because it's real. This is what you might argue, that society and the last 2,000 years have slowly but surely made us concentrate on different aspects of the world, so that the woo-woo is all, now we're blind to it. Or you could say the woo-woo was completely made up and actually we know everything now. I'm not sure what the most healthy attitude is, but I might suggest the former. And that might bring us on to something else which we've very recently learnt about, and which I won't be able to describe in any sort of huge detail, and that is about right and left brain.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that this probably does have something to do with right view as well, or at least understanding it might. So this is by a writer a philosopher, I think, called Ian McGilchrist. He's become quite famous, I think, in very recent times, with his theory. It's not a new theory, about the right and left hemisphere of the brain. Now, I'm going to completely butcher this and really simplify it, but fundamentally, most of what we sort of once understood about the right and left hand side of the brain have been proved to be wrong. So there was a kind of very simple idea that more or less like art came from the right side and logic came from the left side, I think. I'm sure it was more complicated than
Is that why people used to say if you were left-handed you were creative?
Yeah. But it's still not a million miles away from that. But again, I'm going to really simplify it, and by default, I'm going to end up giving the two sides of our brains a little personality, I think, by default. So it's really simple, but it has been kind of scientifically proven to be the case.
Remember that once.
So basically, it is that the left-hand side of the brain does all the sort of admin. Mm-hmm. So the left side of the brain accepts that in any given situation, there is probably a billion different things that you could concentrate on. And what the left hand side of the brain is really good at is concentrating on just the ones that are necessary. So if you're listening to this right now, you're concentrating on the sound of my voice, possibly, or you've turned off and you're concentrating on something else. But anyway, you're concentrating on one or two things, but actually wherever you are, there's a million different things that you could be putting your attention onto. And so the left side brain is very useful at picking the ones which are important. And of course it does this by taking in millions of pieces of information and picking out the ones very quickly. Yeah. And we could not exist without that skill. Yeah. So, if you were just continuously received all of the information that was available to you, you would just go mad. I mean, you couldn't take it all in.
People, and I've heard this related with regards to memories as well. It's like it's insane how much information and memories we store in our brain. Yet, if you try and recall something, you can recall it pretty swiftly. Like it's just insane. If you wanted to find a CD that quickly, you couldn't do it. Yeah. That's a terrible example. I just looked at your CD collection, but you know what I mean. If you're in a massive library of books and you had to quickly find a book, your brain can do that so quickly and in a way that you just don't understand.
Yeah, but it can also ignore all of the other books.
Yeah.
So again, very simply, very, very simply, that's the left-hand side of the brain. So the right side of the brain is the complete opposite of that. It takes in all of the information available, and the two sides of the brain kind of talk to each other and almost argue with each other about what is more important. Now, the argument could be that all of the information that's going into the right-hand side of the brain includes woo-woo, as we're calling it, and the left-hand side of the brain is more or less ignoring the woo-woo bits, the angels in the sky or whatever. Now, obviously, most people would not accept that, and again, I've simplified it down to the most extreme elements, but I think it's fair to say, and this is the argument, is that as modern society, more or less post-industrial revolution, we have put much more of an emphasis on left side of the brain ways of thinking, to the point now, particularly with technology and things like that, where we are almost exclusively existing within the left-hand side of our brains. And as I think has been described, the left-hand side of our brains are kind of dumb, and the right-hand side of the brain is kind of not. And we're just ignoring all of that input. Yeah.
Would that be fair to say that, so the left-hand side of the brain is the one that appreciates, for example, if I had to think of a fact, it's the right-hand side would love to go and look for that fact, whereas the left-hand side maybe is happy that we can just produce it on a phone very quickly.
So
not really.
Maybe no. I think that's probably the old school way of looking at the left and right hand side of the brain. So I think that's specifically what's been disproven. But so I think ultimately it's not quite so how I've described it is not as simple as that, because both sides of the brain actually have it's not as simple, it's not literally as black and white as that. It's much more complex than that. And I've just done that because A, I don't really understand it, and B, we haven't got 5 hours. No, maybe what you said is kind of right. So left hand side of the brain is like, I need information, get information now. Right hand side of the brain is kind of like, let's think about this information and take in all of the different possibilities and consider all of the different things that I've ever experienced which are about this piece of information.
Yeah. Is it what the left-hand brain will appreciate that you've just got a delivery of food to your door, whereas the right-hand brain would be like, let's go for a walk and appreciate the walk along the way and all the nature we can see.
No, I don't think so. Sorry.
Well, I like that.
I think that maybe you're returning back to all of the things that have been disproven again.
Fantastic.
I'm not really sure. Again, it's probably not worth asking me any more questions because I've pretty much explained everything that I understand. I do have the book and I haven't read it yet. So we'll see if maybe I'll have more to say on that later. But the point that I'm trying to make, I suppose, is that this fits into right view, I think, because these are the things that we base our thinking on, right? So if you exist within the right hand side of your brain less and the left hand side of your brain more, then that is going to influence the actual thoughts that you have,
right,
in the grand scheme of things. And so one of the things that and I think this, I'm going to say that this is a Dave's guess, but I think that possibly there is some proof to this, is that something like meditation taps in more to the right hand side of the brain than the left. So there's ritual does the same thing, prayer does the same thing. Most of the religious behaviors are there specifically to put you more on the right hand side of your brain than the left hand side of your brain for a little while.
And is this going back to what we started by saying, that right view is the unconscious behind everything? It's your subconscious sort of thing. So again, when we're meditating, it's trusting that it's doing something underneath what we are consciously aware of. Like our thoughts kind of almost bridge the gap between the subconscious and the conscious, but it's about that stuff that we can't even acknowledge because it's subconscious.
Well, we can't even know really, but it's probably very important.
Yeah.
As to what our behaviour becomes, how we talk to other people, how we react to other people, how we react to the world.
Yeah.
Probably has a huge amount to do with our mental health.
Yeah. Goenka talks about kalpas, I think, which is like these tiny subatomic particles that he believes exists. This is where it gets a little bit woo-woo.
Well, or our metaphors.
Or our metaphors.
As with everything else, it depends if you read it as prose or poetry.
And if we treat it like a metaphor, he definitely kept saying it's very scientific. But the idea of you're breaking down these tiny little particles of, in the past, if you've had a bad thought, if you've done something bad, then you've got these like negative kalpas or whatever they're called, and you want to be dismantling them. And he, again, if you think of it metaphorically, every time you're meditating, every time you're having a negative emotion or a feeling that you don't like and you have an aversion, every time you battle and don't, well, not battle, but every time you don't react to it, he says that these kalpas come to the surface and then dissolve, and you get rid of your stock of negativity, as it were. Which again, maybe it's scientific, maybe it's metaphorical, but I guess that's something about that subconscious stuff behind our views and behind it all.
I think you can see that in our experience of life, though, right? So, I mean, not to be overly simplistic, because I don't think any of this is simplistic, but you could probably see this in a sort of more of a positive thinking type of way. So the idea of positive thinking fundamentally is, and we've certainly talked about this on the podcast before, is that depending on what attitude you bring to a situation, you're going to have a different experience of that situation. And one thing builds on another. So if you go out with a good attitude, or you go out with a really negative attitude, you're going to see all of the good in the first instance. You're going to see all the bad in the second instance. So that's good. That's one thing. But then on top of that, what happens when you start seeing good is that good, some more good builds on that good, because that puts you in an even better mood, and it's continuously circular.
Yeah.
So you see something positive, it makes you feel even better. So you see more things positive, so that makes you feel even better.
Yeah.
And so then you start seeing possibly things that you would have seen negatively, but you see them in a positive light. And equally, the same could happen negatively. Even that Kalapa's thing, if you look at it as a metaphor, if you spend your entire life just looking for the worst things, then you're going to be miserable, and you're going to make other people around you miserable, and that's going to go in a circle and build up, and your life is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and vice versa for if you do that in a sort of positive way.
Yeah, I mean, this is what CBT is based on. I think CBT
totally
kind of comes from a Stoic sort of. There's a Stoic kind of way you can think about it, but I think it's also built into this idea of right view. It's in CBT, it's called your core belief. And if you can change your core belief, then everything follows on from that. Like if your core belief is, I am not worth paying attention to, then walking down the street, someone ignores you, who would normally say hello to you. Your core belief of that means that your behavior is, oh my God, I think that they ignored, your thought is, oh my God, I think that they ignored me. Your behavior is to avoid them, not find out if anything has actually happened, and your resulting feelings are ones of anxiety and feeling sad. But if your core belief is different of, everyone's got their own things going on, I am not the most important person in the world, then someone ignoring you, you think, oh, actually, what's wrong with them? I hope they're okay. I'll reach out to them, and you build upon that. Yeah.
And I think those are practical things that you can do to kind of affect that's maybe more conscious than subconscious. Maybe we've sort of moved on to what we're going to be talking about.
I do think we're tackling thought as opposed to view, but I like the idea of, again, view in some way is situated at the top, but in lots of other diagrams it is all interlinking. So the more you can improve your thought, and you can improve mindfulness is a huge one, because if you can see things as they really are via the practice of mindfulness, then everything else improves beyond that. Every single part of this all improves. It's all interwoven. Which I think is, again, we've talked about this before, the argument for, again, we're talking about view, but I'm just using this opportunity, removing mindfulness, as has happened in the current culture. It's lovely that mindfulness is on the increase, and everyone should do it, but understanding where it situates within these like Eightfold Path is really helpful, because it's having an awareness of all the other things you're meant to be building upon, and the fact that they are building up, and that all those other things affect your mindfulness. That's why removing it is only, you're only getting some of the benefit.
Well, it can actually also be potentially negative as well, right? So if you think of the classic, I think we talked about this in the last couple of weeks, the classic sort of mindfulness for business.
Yes.
Like get better at making money through mindfulness, right? So that you use the mechanisms that have been created to sort of improve your life, but you use it in a negative way, which is actually going to make your life worse.
Well, you're using wrong view.
You're using wrong view, but you're using the right technique to get wrong view. And I think that's the thing with, again, going back, why this is such a basis for the rest of it is because all of the other ones, if you're doing them with the wrong view, can take you into kind of like, make your life worse. You might make more money, might make you better at your job, but again, it's kind of like killing someone else, isn't it? If you're really good at business, you're probably getting a lot of calapas, because you're probably doing everything to make other people's lives worse in order to make your own life better. Mate, that's very simplistic.
No, but I completely get it. You can do the right thing, but have all the wrong. I don't know. Well, let's use the word morals behind it, and it's not going to bring you joy or liberation from being a dick.
No.
I was going to say self-deception, but why?
So on a practical level, what can we do to improve our view?
So Goenka talks about wisdom in 3 different ways. He talks about received wisdom, intellectual wisdom, and experiential wisdom. And I think this is quite a useful thing to come back to when it comes to what can we do. Received wisdom is not one's own wisdom. It's not something experienced for oneself. It's borrowed. And so this can come from, this is where religion might come in, especially like sermons and that sort of stuff. Then you've got intellectual understanding. So this is rationally weighing it up, seeing if it's beneficial, seeing if it's practical, and having a thinking about it. And if you kind of think around it and think that it's true, then you accept it. And this is still not your own insight. And so then he comes to the third one, which comes out of one's own experience, out of personal realization of the truth. This is the wisdom that one lives, real wisdom that will bring about change in one's life by changing the very nature of the mind. And I think this is the one that, again, we don't want to keep banging on about meditation, but it's definitely the very practical way of improving wisdom. It's the experiential learning. It's the actually doing something. I think it's, a lot of people will read books, a lot of people will listen to podcasts, but how many people are actually doing something to change the way their brain is working? And I think, so for us, it's been meditation. Again, we're not trying to be pompous and holier than thou and that we've got it all right, but...
Are we not? I'm about to be, because I think there's more. I think meditation is one thing. I think diet is another. I think that doing exercise is another. Mm-hmm. I think that spending time in fresh air is another. I think there's a bunch of very practical things that you can do, which again, you have to trust in the process, because it's not necessarily going to be obvious, although there will, of course, be benefits, actual benefits that you can see. But, you know, for me, my brain has changed so much since I changed my diet, without question. I know I've talked about that a lot. And I think that those are the sorts of things that you can do to sort of tap in almost to making improvements into this kind of basis of what everything else is then sort of grows out of.
Definitely. I also like, and not to poo-poo on the received wisdom and the intellectual one, because I think also, and this is going to be pompous, but especially recently, a lot of like non-fiction reading, a lot of reading about ideas, everything interlinks and feeds each other. So I do think it's really important that when it comes to right view, whilst there might not be a right view, there's definitely a lot of different views. And I think it's really important people don't just stay in their own little lane. I think that's definitely the way to become very unwise. Because if you just sat there with your own thinking, I know it's not about thinking, but your own views and your own echo chamber, I don't know how you can practically get any wiser.
Also, I think it infects your subconscious.
Yeah.
Like everything that you do consciously infects your subconscious.
Exactly. So I think when people aren't exploring other ideas or other views, or maybe worse, just completely shutting them down without acknowledging other views, this is where it comes back to all views are wrong views. If you're someone who is so completely of the belief that you're in the right, to the point where you will shut other people down, no one's benefiting and no one's getting any wiser. The idea of, saying, I know that I don't know, it sounds dumb, but it's not dumb. It's just acknowledging that there is so much more to know and so much wisdom to glean from a view that is not your own. That, and maybe this is all too conscious of it, but like you say, everything that we do consciously will affect our subconscious eventually and builds upon each other.
Having a hard stance on anything gets in the way of having the right view.
Yeah.
Brad Warner talks a little bit about kind of intuition and common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And more or less says, like, fundamentally, in all of us, we know what the right view is. But all of the weird shit that we put into our head gets in the way of having that right view. And I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think that most people, again, sorry, I don't know why I keep going back to do not kill, but, fundamentally, we all
really
know.
Don't kill people, guys.
Well, no, don't kill. But we all know, clearly, there's something inside of us which tells us that killing somebody else is a bad thing.
Yeah.
We don't really need religion to tell us that. Although maybe we do, because maybe there's proof in history that we didn't once know that. But that's just like absolute common sense. But if you fill your head with, I'm not saying that these these influences exist. But if you filled your head with a bunch of influencers that said, go on guys, kill, go on kill, go on kill. I mean, you probably see this to some extent with terrorists, right? I mean, there is examples of people whose culture basically says, actually, it is all right to kill these people. And so, of course, that's definitely the wrong view.
But it's also just not in fundamentalism and terrorism. You've used this example before, and I think it's really apt now. When Donald Trump nearly died via being shot, the amount of people that just thought it was okay to say, shame he missed, or a few centimetres to the left, and you're just like, did you actually want this person to die?
Well, not to mention the CEO of the healthcare place that actually was murdered. And this was celebrated by people who just happen to be fascists with the right point of view, maybe.
Yeah. No, but it is true. It's just about, this is where we get blind, where we believe our view is so in the right and other views are so in the wrong, that you can lose sight of morality and celebrate people that murder other people. Again, that chap that did that murder.
It's all right because he's handsome, so don't.
But that's it. It was kind of almost a joke, but almost. I don't know where it was really sick. I don't know where the joke ended and people's real feelings existed. But there's an awful lot of people that are in our little left bubble that. Really, I didn't know where the irony was, and you just.
I don't think there was any irony.
I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't want to ask because I just didn't want to even infect my subconscious with it. It just kind of is a bit scary that people that believe that they are for everyone can still agree that someone should have been murdered.
Well, not just for crazy. Everyone, but I mean, I've said this before, are fundamentally against the death penalty.
Yeah.
For anything.
Yeah.
The death penalty is bad.
Yeah.
But this guy should kill this guy.
Because again, it comes down to views, because they don't align with your views, so therefore they can go. It's just like, no. And this is definitely where I appreciate all views are wrong, because if you can get to that point where your view outweighs someone else's view to the point where you think they should die, even though fundamentally you don't think people should die, it's just insane.
Well, it's cognitive dissonance, and it's ignorance basically. But this fundamentally comes back to your point from earlier about learning other people's opinions about things too, right? So one of the things is that if you view yourself as being in the right, then anything that you do in the name of being in the right is fine, and everybody else is bad. Yeah. Now that's fine, and in a lot of ways we've had it pretty good from our political stance in that context, because we haven't really had much power ever before, so you can kind of have that attitude. But that's not always going to be the case. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that if nothing else, like the last few generations of people coming through, probably mostly, and it's changing a bit because there's been a bit of a reaction, I think, to it. But anyway, let's not get into that. Most people are going to have similar views to us. And so once you become the majority, then you turn into the Nazis if you just keep saying, yeah, it's fine to kill people that we disagree with. And I don't think that's something that people think about enough. But that is definitely wrong view. Yeah.
I think it's definitely something that is in the world literally right now. And I just don't know why people don't want to acknowledge other people's views and listen to other people, and are so steadfast. That's my main. It's been a long walk around to get there, but yeah, I do think this is the way to get a bit wiser and get a bit more right view, is to hear other people's views, weigh up your views, and then probably acknowledge that none of this is worth having negativity generally. I don't know, I think I'm waffling off it a bit, but I just think I can understand where the all views are wrong view come from, when the minute you've got a view and the minute that your world is interpreted by a particular standpoint, I don't know, I think often leading in the end, like you say, in the end everyone becomes the bad guys.
So it's not just knowing what you don't know in that context though, is it? It's also knowing yourself. I think know thyself is also... There you go. Someone else Socrates said that. As well. I don't know who said that.
Probably.
Yeah. So in that context, it's about finding ways to look at your own biases and your own things that you've got right and things that you've got wrong, and then maybe also appreciating that you're in the worst position to be able to say what you've got right and what you've got wrong. And this sort of enters more into the Buddhist idea of no self, like accepting the fact that you just don't know and that you're probably wrong about most things, and that you should never go in with a hard and fast attitude. But I think that will move us on nicely to what we're going to be talking about in the next episode. So unless you have anything to add...
No, just something that struck me with what you just said is that is a surefire way, because it feels all negative, but all of this is a surefire way to have compassion for others.
Have a conversation with your own subconscious. The only way that I've actually been able to do that is by going on this silent retreat. I mean, ultimately, what this comes down to is having a conversation with the little 12-year-old boy that's inside your heart.
Who doesn't like other boys.
Who doesn't like other boys and probably has loads of other discriminatory opinions and, hates way more things than you actually realise and is scared of way more things than you actually realise. And then being aware of that. No, I mean, being aware of that has been nothing but positive.
Yeah.
Because whilst it doesn't make it go away... Yeah. I think in lots of ways that's probably, for me personally, the way that my view has changed from the perspective of view as we're discussing it, i.e. a subconscious bias which everything else is based upon.
Yeah.
The thing that's changed most for me is that I was able to have that space to actually learn about myself. Mm-hmm. And you don't necessarily have to go and be silent for 10 days to do that, although it's a fucking great way of doing it, for the record.
It's cheaper than psychoanalysis.
Way cheaper, but you can get that through analysis. Mm-hmm. You can also get that just through challenging yourself in lots of ways. I mean, there's loads of different ways to do it.
Yeah.
Which we probably won't be able to go through all of them. But conversing with yourself. John Vervaeke talks about this. Pick a subject and then in your head talk in full sentences and discuss it with yourself.
Journaling, that would be one of the other ways.
Yeah, journaling is a very good.
Writing it all down and actually figuring out what you think.
Pick an opinion that you hold really strongly and then argue the complete opposite of it and really research that and try and work out what the arguments are that are against you. Yeah. Not because it's going to change your mind, but because it will just open your mind.
It makes you really flesh out what you think and what you... Again, it's the unconscious sort of stuff. You can't really get to it, but you can have a good go. I did part of my course I'm doing for work at the moment. It's a leadership course, and one of them was about unconscious biases. And we had to go onto this website that has all of these kind of tests. It's kind of clever how they do it, comparing one group with another group. And it's all done in a strange way that is meant to be into your subconscious. And it tells you whether you have an unconscious bias. And it is so useful because it's not there to make you feel bad or to, confirm. It is there to confirm and deny things that you didn't know about yourself. But it's just about what you then do with that. It's really helpful.
Turns out Siobhan's really racist.
I'm not really racist, but apparently I really don't like old people that much.
Which is bad news for me.
Yeah. But it's really interesting because it's not to punish you. It's to say scientifically we all have an unconscious that leans one way or another, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to understand about yourself. Like you say, know thyself. Like it's stop filling your head with absolute crap and get to know what's actually under there.
Don't have a fixed, rigid outlook.
Yes, exactly. Flexibility, guys. Be nice. Be compassionate.
That's the end.
Yeah.
Next episode, we will be continuing our Eightfold Path. I hope this has been somewhat useful.
I have no idea.
If not, you might. We'll see. We'll see next week if you come
Everyone's
back.
I've got the next 7 episodes off. Oh, God.
So we will see you in 2 weeks' time. This podcast comes out every other Thursday without fail. We don't advertise it on social media or really in any other way. So if you would like to help us out and tell your friends, please do so. If you would like to email us, it is shamcityroasters@gmail.com. And we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Ta-ra.
I hope by then you will know thyself.